Hello, how are you all doing? So, today is the 5th of May, and finally, I am getting to record today's 4 random books. It's been an interesting day so far. Car insurance bills. So, that's sorted out. What's today's topic? What is the first 4 random books I'm recording today in what is going to be a series I'm recording 5 or 6 today? Well, Romans. Specifically, I have got The Complete Roman Army by Adrian Goldsworthy. I have The Complete Roman Legions by Nigel, Pollard, and Joanne. Very cool books. Greater Than Napoleon, Scipio Africanus, as discussed by Basil J. Liddel Hart, and unfortunately today I have light coming at me from everywhere. So, I'm sorry. This is a white background. And Legions of Rome, which you've seen before, but Stephen Dando-Collins' book is gorgeous, massive, and beautiful. And if I was going to talk about the others, I had to have it. I have to say, I did almost put in the Name of Rome, which is another Goldsworthy book about Romans, but I decided that I would save that for another day. So let's start off with one of the new books. And when I say new books, I mean these books have been sent to me to review. They're my first Roman history books that are sent to me to review. So happy. Anyway, so they'll be getting stuff in brew ships, but they're also going to be in this 4 random books. And that's because they are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, they have beautiful illustrations. Both these books, they come together really in a pair. You shouldn't get one without getting the other. You want the legions, you want the whole army, you want to know it all. And this is beautiful. It's got beautiful maps of the battles, which I'm not sure if you can get it out the sunline. There you can sort of see. Boom. That's just even worse in the sunline. There you go. Beautiful maps. They have beautiful pictures. They have these lovely drawings, outline the designs of the legion camps and their organizations. It's just beautiful. And they talk about the consular forces, the original forces, how it grows up. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. And it really gives you a wonderful insight into the world of the Romans. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that a book which is less than £20, it's £18.95, is the be-all and end-all book. There are books which have more detail in various parts on things, and one of those I'll be talking about in a bit. But if you want a good general overview book and you don't want to start spending 60, 70, 80 pounds, this is a very, very good book to get. And that's the important thing to remember. This has got a lot of good information in it. It's got a lot of great stuff. If you're a professor of Roman history and Roman archaeology, would I tell you to go and buy this book? Possibly just to watch your face when you read it. But if you're a general historian and you're enthusiastic about this and you want to have a quality of history that you can rely on, that you can enjoy, and that you can use when you wander around the Roman sites in Europe or Britain, wherever you wander, it's a great book. And it's published by lovely people. Thames and Hudson are a good publishing company. They're nice people. So, I'm going to go to my favourite chapter, and it's one of the chapters I really love in this book, which is the other officers, Centurionate and below. It's got a whole section on legionary centurions. Centurion is better thought of as a grade or type of officer, rather than a specific rank. The centurions of the first cohort, collectively known as the primi ordains, were certainly of higher status than the other centurions of the legion. The relationship between the centurions in the other 9 cohorts of the legion is less clear. We know that the commander of each of the 6 centuries in a cohort had a different title, and can infer that to some extent the differences in seniority between the 3 lines of the Republican army were preserved. Much administration was carried out at the level of the century, and soldiers were more likely to describe themselves as a member of a particular century than a particular cohort. However, the cohort was the basic tactical unit, as well as playing a significant role in building projects, and cannot have functioned effectively without a commander. There is no evidence for any rank equivalent to the auxiliary prefect, and the conclusion must be that one of the centurions acted as cohort commander. The Pilus Prior, commander of the senior century, would seem the most probable candidate for this role, but it is also possible that seniority and hence command was instead based on length of service. Caesar talks of promoting centurions from a lower grade in an experienced legion to a higher grade in a newly recruited unit, implying a rise in status, responsibility, and perhaps pay, though not admission to the first cohort. The late Roman theorist Vegetus claimed the promotion for centuries and all other ranks in legion involved movement between cohorts as well as centuries. According to him, the first cohort was senior, followed by the second, third, and so on. On promotion, a man was immediately posted to the 10th cohort and had to begin to work his way step by step back up the order of seniority. Therefore, some cult scholars believe that a man would normally work his way from being a hastius posterior of the 10th cohort, and hence the junior centurion in the entire legion, stage by stage until he reached the post of primus pilus in the first. Yet it is very difficult to see how this system could have possibly worked. Unless such a process took an incredibly long time, then no one could have served for more than a few months in any of these capacities. An alternative view was to see the 6th century grades in the cohorts 2 to 10 as equal, so that promotion was either to a senior century in any cohort, or eventually into the privileged ranks of the prima ordines. Other commentators have gone further and denied that there were any distinction between centurions outside the first cohort. This seems too extreme, and whilst we must admit that we do not fully understand the system, it's clear that one existed. Becoming a centurion. We know of 3 basic routes to appointment as a legionary centurion. After service in the ranks as a principalis or in the junior staff, post in legion, it has been estimated on average it took a man 15 to 20 years to become a centurion this way. After, or in the course of service in the Praetorian Guard, Praetorians served for only 16 years, making their veterans somewhat younger than their legionary counterparts. Direct commission. Some equestrians were appointed in this way. Other men who were less wealthy, but still relatively well off, gained appointments after service as magistrates in their local city. All 3 methods are reasonably well attested throughout the 1st and 2nd centuries. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to assess which methods was most common. One of the first scholars to study promotion in any detail argued that most officers came from the ranks of the Praetorian Guard. This allowed the emperor to ensure that the bulk of the centurions in legions were men promoted because of their loyalty to him. However, since a disproportionately large part of surviving inscriptions come from Italy, the main recruiting ground for the Praetorians, but not the legions, it is likely that the Italian centurions, and therefore former Praetorians, are too highly represented in the record. Few scholars now accept this view, and most instead assume that the vast majority of legionary centurions were promoted from the ranks. Directly commissioned men are assumed to have been only a small proportion of total, even if, with their superior connections, they had a greater prospect of reaching the highest posts. Yet even though this view is now generally accepted, it rests on very slender evidence. The overwhelming majority of centurions attested make no mention of any service prior to that rank, as indeed many prima pillars fail to mention any more junior posts. It is conveniently assumed that this was because men wished to conceal service as honorary soldiers once they had risen to higher station. Whilst it is possible, it is also equally plausible to suggest that those men who specifically mentioned rising from ranks did so because they were proud of what was a rare and difficult achievement. Let's be honest. Whilst it's a nice idea to view, I don't know, some military organization as a group of equals, it's rare, and as people need to make a decision. And as we all know, people like to avoid making a decision unless they absolutely have to. And that's the whole thing. With rank comes privilege, but also comes responsibility. And that was something the Romans certainly understood very well. So, this is a greater than Napoleon Scipio Africanus. It is a white cover on a yellow surrounding, and as such, picks up the sun brilliantly. I mean, if you want a book you can use as a mirror, this is your book. well, not as a mirror as a sort of surface to see your face in, but as a mirror to shine light in other people's faces, it works. But this is a good book. It's written by Basil Liddel, so it's pretty interesting in its making the case for armored warfare by talking about Scipio Africanus. But it's worth reading because it's got, how do I put this? It's well researched. I don't agree with everything in there, and I know he doesn't get everything right. But the point it makes make you think. And sometimes a book is worth having because it makes you think. Chapter 8, A Political Hitch. The interval between the return of Laelis and the embarkation for Africa is occupied, apart from material preparation, by 2 episodes of significance. The first is Scipio's apparent sideshow at Lockery. The second, the political imbroglio, which for a time threatened his ruin and that of his plans. Both deserve study, for they light they shed on his character as a commander and man. Lockery lay on the underpart of the toe of Italy, near modern Greece, and was in Hannibal's possession. After his brother Hasdrubal's defeat at Materis, Hannibal had fallen back on Bruttium, the southernmost province of Italy, and here he held at bay the consular armies, who dared not advance to seek out the scarred but indomitable lion in his mountain vastness. Some Locrians, who had gone outside the walls, were captured by a Roman raiding party, and taken the Rhegium, the port adjacent to Sicily, where they were recognised by the pro-Roman Locrian nobles, who had found sanctuary there when their town fell into Carthaginian hands. Certain of the prisoners, who were skilled artisans and had been in employment and trusted to Carthaginians, suggested that, if ransomed, they would be willing to betray the citadel at Lockery. The nobles, eager to regain their town, at once ransomed the artisans, and after concerting a plan and signals, sent them back to Lockery. Then, going to Scipio at Syracuse, they told him of the scheme. He saw the opportunity, and dispatched on the venture a detachment of 3,000 men under 2 military tribunes. Exchanging signals with the conspirators inside, ladders were let down at midnight, and the attackers swarmed up the walls. Surprise magnified the strength, and the Carthaginians, in confusion, fled from the citadel to a second citadel on the farther side of the town. For several days, encounters occurred between the two parties without decisive result. Alive to the danger of his garrison and to the threatened loss of an important point, Hannibal moved to the rescue, sending a messenger ahead with orders to the garrison to make a sortie at daybreak as a cloak to what he hoped would be a surprise assault. He had not, however, brought scaling ladders with him, and so was forced to postpone his attack a day while he was preparing these and other materials for sawing walls. Scipio, who was at Messina, received word of Hannibal's move and planned a counter-surprise. Leaving his brother in command at Messina, he embarked a force and, setting sail on the next tide, arrived at harbour of Lockery shortly before nightfall. The troops were hidden in town during the night, a concealment made possible by the townspeople favouring, though not only openly taking, the side of the Romans. Next morning, Hannibal launched his assault in conjunction with a sortie from the Carthaginian citadel. As the scaling ladders were being brought forward, Scipio sallied out from one of the town gates and attacked the Carthaginians in the flank and the rear. The shock of the surprise had dislocated and disorganized the Carthaginians, and his plan upset, Hannibal fell back on his own camp. Realizing that the Romans, because of their grip on the town, were masters of the situation, he withdrew during the night, sending word to his garrison in the citadel to make their way out as best they could and rejoin him. For Scipio, this sideshow was a very real asset. Apart from the personal prestige he gained from success in this first encounter with dreaded Hannibal, scoring a trick even off the master of ruses, he had helped the Roman campaign in Italy by curtailing Hannibal's remaining foothold in that country, without any diminution of his own force. But beyond these personal indirect gains, his success had an important bearing on his own future, part of the plan of operations, for he had blooded his troops against Hannibal, and by the success enterprise gave them a moral tonic, which would be of immense value in the crucial days to come. It is unfortunate that for this episode, as for Layla's reconnaissance in Africa, we have no Polybius to reveal to us the motives and calculations which inspired Scipio's moves. The loss of Polybius's books on this period must be replaced by deduction from the facts, and from the knowledge already gained of Scipio's mind. To those who have followed his constant and far-sighted exploits of the moral element during his Spanish campaigns, there can be little doubt that he seized on the Lockery expedition as a heaven-sent chance, not only to test and sharpen his weapon for the day of trial, but to dispel in his troops the impression of Hannibalic invincibility. The second episode arose out of the subsequent administration of recaptured Lockery. When Scipio had sent the original force to seize the town, he instructed Quintius Plinius, the propraetor of Regnum, to assist the tribunes. and when the place was captured, Plemius, by virtue of seniority, assumed the command until Scipio arrived. After the repulse of Hannibal's relieving force, Scipio returned to Sicily, and Plemius was naturally left in chief command of the town as defence, though the detachment from Sicily remained under direct command of the tribunes. How Plemius abused his trust is one of the most sordid pages in Roman history. The wretched inhabitants suffered worse from his tyranny and lust than ever they had from the Carthaginians, an ill requital of their aid to the Romans in regaining the town. The example of their leader infected the troops, and their greed for loot not only harassed the townspeople, but inevitably led to disorder amongst themselves. It seemed that the tribunes strove to check this growing license and to uphold the true standards of military discipline. One of Plemius' men, running away with a silver cup that he had stolen from a house and pursued by its owners, met the tribunes in his flight. They stopped him and had the cup taken away, whereat his comrades showed abuse of the tribunes, and disturbance soon ended in a free fight between the soldiers of the tribunes and those of Plemius. The latter were worse and invoked the aid of their commander, inciting him by tales of reproaches cast upon his behaviour and control. Plemius thereupon ordered the tribunes to be brought before him, stripped and beaten. During the short delay while the rods were being brought and themselves stripped, the tribunes called upon their men for aid. The latter, hastily gathering from their all quarters, were so inflamed at the sight that breaking loose from the habits of discipline, they vented their rage on Plemius. Cutting him off from his party, they mutilated his nose ears and left him almost lifeless. When word of the disturbances reached Scipio, he sailed immediately for Locri and held a court of inquiry. On the evidence and of the reasons for his judgment we know nothing. All that is handed down is the fact that he acquitted Plemius, restored his command, and pronounced the tribunes guilty, ordering them to be thrown into chains and sent back to Rome for the Senate to deal with. He then returned to Sicily. The verdict appears somewhat astonishing, the one serious blemish, in fact, on Scipio's judgment. The motives which inspired it are difficult to surmise. Perhaps it was partly pity for the mutilated Plemius, combined with anger that his own men should have shown such gross insubordination and committed such an atrocity. It is a natural instinct with the best type of commander to be more severe on the misconduct of his own direct subordinates than of those who are only attached to him. And in case of dispute between the two, such a man may err because of his very scrupulous to hold the balance fairly, and to avoid partiality towards his own. It is said one of the finest British commanders in the War of 1914-18 that if he had a personal dislike or distrust of a subordinate, he invariably gave the latter more rope than the others, knowing that if his distrust was justified, the man would assuredly use this rope to hang himself. Similar may have been the motives underlying Scipio's outward inexplicable verdict. In criticising it, the historian must consider not only the gaps in our knowledge of the case, but view the incident in the general light of all Scipio's recorded acts as a commander. The whole weight of evidence, as we have seen, goes to show that the two qualities which especially distinguished Scipio were the acuteness of his understanding of men and his humanity to the conquered. Trust in a Plemius or coronation of brutality were the last things to be expected of him, so lacking evidence as to the facts on which his decision was based, be rash to pass adverse judgment of his action. We need to remember also that Locri was in Italy and therefore outside his province, and that close attention to administration could only be at the expense of his primary object, preparation for the expedition to Africa. Actually, what's probably more of thinking is if he acquitted his own tribunes, I would say, then that could be said to be him playing prejudice, whereas if he acquits Blubulus, it's someone else's problem, because they're his local administrator. They have to deal with that, and the Senate will most likely acquit his tribunes afterwards. Right. Now look. Now this one. This is going to be longer than 15 minutes, but it's Rome, so it's gorgeous. Stephen Dando-Collins, Legions of Rome. This is one of the coolest books you will ever read. It is much more expensive, though. And it's every single Roman legion, all sorts of disasters. It's an exhaustive book. And I'm going to read the 15th Primogenia Legion and the 16th Gallica Legion. Not Fortune's favourite. Founded by Caligula for his farcical invasion of Britain, when he had his troops fire into the English Channel and collect seashells as war trophies, this legion was renamed by Claudius and abolished by Vespasian. The legion was apparently raised by Caligula for his planned but never executed invasion of Britain. It was named after Fortuna Primogenia, the goddess of fortune. This was the favourite deity of Claudius, Caligula's uncle and successor, in AD 41, so it is not impossible that Claudius actually named both this and the 22nd Primogenia. This Legion is likely to have taken the number 15 because it was raised in the traditional recruiting grounds of the existing 15th Legion, the Apollinaris. Based at Mainz on the Upper Rhine after Caligula's aborted a British operation. By AD 46 it had moved to Verona on the Lower Rhine. There, in AD 69-70, the Legion became embroiled in the protracted defence of Verona, or Old Camp as it was known, with thousands of men killed by the rebels. The shattered 15th Primigenian Legion was abolished by the new Emperor Vespasian, once the Civilist revolt was terminated in the autumn of AD 70. 16th Gallica Legion. Paying the price of disloyalty. Fighting stoutly under Germanicus, only to disgrace itself in the Civilist revolt. A legion that was disbanded by Vespasian, who reformed it as the 16th Flavia, and sent it to the east. Raised in Gaul, the 16th Gallica Legion was serving under Drusus Caesar on the Rhine in 16 BC, where it remained throughout its short career. Based at Mainz, it marched for Drusus' son Germanicus Caesar in his German campaigns of AD 14-16. In the reign of Nero, the legion was transferred to Novatium on the Lower Rhine. There, in January 1869, it joined its fellow Rhine legions in hailing Vitellius emperor, and soon after sent several of its cohorts to Italy to help defeat Otho and install Vitellius on the throne. The remaining 16th Gallica cohorts became caught up in the Civilist revolt, ultimately deserting their young general, Henrius Gallus, surrendering to the rebels and allowing Gallus to be executed in the spring of AD 70. For these two crimes, the new Emperor Vespasian abolished the legion in the same year. He reformed as the 16th Flavia Legion. And then this goes on to the 16th Flavia Firma. Vespasian's own. Formed in AD 70 to replace the disgraced and abolished 16th Gallica, the 16th Flavia took Vespasian's family name and emblem of the lion, which was associated with Vespasian's favourite deity, Hercules. With the shameful history of the 16th Gallica to remind it of what it must avoid, the 16th Flavia sent off for a new career in the east. Its first firm base was Satala, in the new province of Cappadocia. From there it joined the Emperor Trajan's AD 114-116 campaign, Parthian campaign, after which, licking its wounds, it moved to a new base in Armenia, Smosa, near Samsat in Turkey. By the reign of Septimius Severus, the 16th Flavia had relocated to Syria, where it was still based at Osius and late in the 4th century. Now, actually, that makes a lot of sense. It's going to sound strange. Why would you take a disgraced legion and form it up as part of a new legion? Well, A, there were elements which were probably not that bad, and B, this is the more important thing which you have to remember, you've suddenly got a load of soldiers. You have two choices with those soldiers. You either, well, three choices. You can kill them all. You can fire them, in which case they could become brigante or other problems. You can turn them into slaves, which again is basically turning them into other problems. Or you can reform them into another legion and send them off somewhere else in the world with new officers or organized nicely so they can go and possibly die or earn back their honor fighting for you. It's a waste to kill good soldiers. It's going to give you a massive problem if you turn them into slaves, because slaves who are already soldiers, you've had issues with them in the past. Now you're talking about ones who are fully trained Roman soldiers who can know and act like legionaries. Well, that's a problem waiting to rear itself up, isn't it? So next one. Let's kill them all. That's, as I said, expensive. So sending them away under a new flag. That works. And now we have Adrian Goldsworthy. I like his books. The Complete Roman Army. Now, why is this good? Why do you want this instead, as well as the Complete Roman Legions? Because, simply put, the Roman army was much more than just legions. It was a lot of things more than just legions. You have to remember, your legion is the backbone of your military fighting force, but it will have auxiliaries with it anyway. And these will be large units. They could well be your archers, your spearmen, your cavalry. There are some Roman cavalry. They're very few. They might also be your wall guards. Famously on Hadrian's Wall. Let's read about that, because I'm British, so I like Hadrian's Wall. Rather than attempting to describe each of the different linear boundaries, it is probably best to concentrate on the best known and preserved of them all in a little more detail. Hadrian succeeded to the throne on the death of Trajan in 117. But the circumstances of his adoption as heir was somewhat suspicious, and his position was initially insecure. Abandoning most of his predecessors' eastern conquests, Hadrian spent most of his reign touring the provinces, taking particular care to inspect the provincial armies and ensure their loyalty. It's possible there was an outbreak of serious fighting in northern Britain at the beginning of his reign. The emperor visited the island in 122 and ordered the construction of a great wall, according to his 4th century biographer, to separate the barbarians from the Romans. Although influenced by the line of the existing Dangut frontier, a line of forts and outposts running along an east-west road, Hadrian's wall lay generally a little further north. Running along the high ground, especially in such sections as the craggy Wind Sill. Wherever possible, the wall ran along the crest of this and other ridges, stretching from one horizon to another. There is some evidence to suggest that the wall itself was originally whitewashed, which can only have increased its visible presence. Whitewashing walls was quite common. In fact, Shadversity gets into this when talking about castles. They were often whitewashed. This was good, because if you build a wooden castle and it's whitewashed, it looks the same as a stone castle, which is whitewashed. And whitewash is a lot cheaper than stone. Admittedly, anyone who actually inspects it closely soon works out that that's wood, but you know. The thing is, painting stuff was pretty darn common at this time, and it was a good way of increasing, making it look good. The US Navy, with its ships, could do with painting them more regularly at the moment. Multiple navies could do. If it looks good, it's going to be how do I put this? Get more respect. Hadrian's Wall was 80 miles in length, 73 miles, or modern miles, that is, or 117 kilometers, extending from Baunus on Sole in the west to Wallsend, Segdum, in the east. Over half of the wall was built in stone. But the westernmost section, of some 31 Roman miles, was originally a turf and timber rampart. This section was later replaced in stone, usually on the same line, although in one or two places this was altered, allowing us to see short stretches of the original turf wall. For instance, to the west of Birdserwald, there was just one of several major design changes made throughout the wall's life. At first, the stone wall was planned to be 10 Roman feet wide, 3 meters, and some stretches known to the archaeologists as a broad wall were completed this width. Elsewhere, only the foundations were laid to this size, and the actual wall was narrower, at 8 or even 6 Roman feet, 1.8 meters wide. In at least one places, the foundations of broad wall were abandoned altogether, and a narrow wall built near the top of the crags. The stone wall always had a cobbled stone foundation, as did some structures of the turf wall. An inner core of rubble and outer faces of stone set in lime mortar. The original height is unknown, nor is it certain whether or not it was simply a barrow wall, as Hadrian's German frontier system, or was topped with a walkway and battlements along which patrols could move. The broad wall marked the original plan, and it was at this stage that the buildings originally intended to form part of the system were marked out and possibly constructed. Every Roman mile there was a small fortlet, today known as Mile Castle, and conventionally numbered from east to west. Between each Mile Castle were 2 small turrets. In several cases, Mile Castles and turrets were clearly built with short sections of broad wall either side, long before the main connecting wall was completed to the narrower gauge. Mile Castles tended to average some 18 square meters internally, but as already mentioned, each of the 3 legions constructing the wall formed a slightly different design. The Mile Castles of Legio II, Augusta, tended to be wider than they were deep, the opposite of those built by the other 2 legions. All Mile Castles had a gateway in their southern wall and another leading north. The latter was topped by a tower, and this may also sometimes have been the case with the southern gateway. The survival of the stone steps in the Mile Castle 48 at Balterus Burn demonstrates that the walls within a Mile Castle did have a walkways, and suggests a height of about 4 meters, or 13 feet. Mile castles in the turf wall were similar in basic design. Internal buildings seem to have been added after the original construction, and tend to be fairly crude, as far as possible, positioning conformed to the original regular plan. The result that some of these fortlets were in highly unsuitable locations. The northern gateway sometimes opened onto a slope or cliff, whilst the entire mine castle might be set into a steep valley, which dramatically reduced visibility from the tower. The same rigid adherence to a plan marked the location of turrets. At Steel Rig, a third extra tower was added, probably to permit observation into a wide area of dead ground left by the original design. In the original design, the bulk of the garrisons for the frontier zone was to remain in existing forts along the Stangate, a mile or more to the south. However, within a few years, this initial conception was altered, and forts added to the line of the wall itself. In several cases, this involved the demolition of existing structures. For instance, at Housesteads, where the north wall was built on top of an at least partially completed turret. The forts on the wall added to the number of gateways, giving the army access to the north. Eventually, there were 15 forts actually on or very close to the wall, and other bases in advance of the line, behind it, and on both flanks. Some of the bases behind the wall had clear supporting functions. The military compound in the town of Corbridge appears to have been a depot, with significant storage space and workshop facilities. South Shields, Arabia, fort south of the mouth of the Tyne, was at one stage a massive supply dump, containing a large number of granaries. As usual, most forts were surrounded by large civilian canabe, and the impression given by the inscription is of a very cosmopolitan community. The southernmost boundary of the military zone was marked by the Vallum, a modern and somewhat inaccurate term which has nevertheless become conventional. The Vallum was a broad, flat-bottomed ditch with a low mound running on either side of it. There were 2 formal crossing places, both controlled by the army. The Cumbrian coast to the west contained what was effectively an extension of the system, with forts, mile castles, and turrets, but no connecting wall. Most of these sites appear to have been abandoned long before the end of the 2nd century, presumably when the Romans' perception of the military situation had changed. How did the wall work? It's clearly a mistaken to imagine vast hordes of Caledonian or later Pictish invaders hurling themselves at Hadrian's wall as the Roman defenders manned the battlements to oppose them. Even if the wall did have a walkway, the whole structure was not intended as a fighting platform. It would have presented a large enemy army with a difficult but not impassable barrier. This wall could be scaled with ladders, but this would be a slow way of getting a large number of men across, and obviously not practical for horses. It would be better to capture a gateway, but further progress for animals would be impeded by the vallum unless one of the 2 crossing places could be taken. Any such delays only gave the Romans more time to assemble a field force and move to intercept the enemy. This was invariably the objective here, as on the other frontiers, to bring the enemy to battle and defeat them swiftly and decisively. In most cases, the mustering of a substantial tribal army should have been reported before it had a chance to make an attack. As on other frontiers, diplomatic activity will have kept the northern tribes under observation. The outpost forts also had an important role to play. Bute Castle appears to have been built around a long-established native shrine, and may have allowed the army to monitor religious gatherings amongst the tribesmen in that area. The mustering of large armies would have been a rare occurrence. Raiding, often on a very small scale, is likely to have been far more common. A legal text does refer to the case of a woman condemned to penal servitude, but then captured from Roman North of Britain in such a foray. She was subsequently sold back into the province and brought by a centurion named Coitius Firmus, quite possibly the same man who set up altars in Scotland. The Vinola tablets predate Hadrian's Wall, but it is worth remembering that the small number of wounded soldiers in the hospital, as well as the fragmentary text describing the fighting characteristics of local Little Britons, which describes all the light horsemen. Whilst it cannot have been too difficult for a handful of men to sneak across the wall, they could only do so on foot, and returning with any bulky plunder would have been difficult. Such small-scale raids were extremely unlikely to be reported in our sources, and the distinction between these and violent crime was always indistinct. They're good books. Right. I hope you enjoyed that. Remember, as ever, if you do like the videos, please press the little like button down there. If you want to hear more of these videos, press the subscribe. If you really want to hear when I go live and chat about history, there is a bell down there. Thank you very much. Links to Patreon and Discord are below. And as always, hope you've enjoyed. Thank you. Take care. That was 4 Random Books, episode 35.